Good morning. I'm Dan Owen, and this is Passage Attack. Today, the passage for our consideration is Isaiah chapter 7. I want to talk to you about two kinds of prophecy, or two ways in which prophecy can be viewed. One is prophecy that is inspired by God, that has a literal Old Testament meaning. And the second way is when a prophecy that has a literal meaning can also have a spiritual or full meaning in the New Testament. Our example today comes from Isaiah chapter 7. So let's start with a little story that gives us the background of Isaiah 7. In the time of Isaiah, there was a king in Syria by the name of Reza. Reza wanted the kingdom of Judah, and he allied with the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, which was a guy by the name of Pekah. And these two kings, Reza and Pekah of Syria and Israel, together they made a plot to come down here and take over the kingdom of Judah. And the king of Judah at that time was not a very good guy, whose name was Ahaz. Excuse me. Now, when Ahaz heard about this plot of the two northern kings, Reza and Pekah, to come take over his kingdom, he was very much afraid. And God sent Isaiah, the man of God, to meet with Ahaz to calm him down. And basically God's message to Ahaz was, don't worry about those two kings of the north. If you will trust in me, then I will not let this happen. But you've got to trust in me. And Isaiah could see that Ahaz was hesitant to trust God. He wanted to make an alliance with a foreign nation. And so he says, ask for a sign. Ask a sign of anything in the heavens or on the earth, and I'll give it to you. And Ahaz, who was reluctant to trust God, says, oh no, I wouldn't ask God for a sign. I would never, tempt the Lord in anything like this. And so God says, Ahaz, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. So in Isaiah chapter 7, beginning in verse 13, then Isaiah said, hear this, you house of David. House of David here is referring to Ahaz, the king of Judah. See, that's the house of David. Hear this, house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of men? Will you try the patience of God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Now see, the you here is Ahaz, the king of Judah. See, that's the one that the Lord is going to give a sign. The virgin will conceive and will bear a son, and you will call him Immanuel. And he, this he right here, refers to Immanuel. He will eat curds and honey when he, Immanuel, knows enough to reject wrong and choose the right. But before the boy, that's still Immanuel, knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Well, we remember from what we talked about a moment ago that that land is the land of Syria with its king Reza, and the land of Israel with its king Pekah, who were bound and determined to gang up on poor King Ahaz. So the sign would be a child born in the time of Ahaz. It was actually Isaiah's son, and Isaiah's son would be named Immanuel, which means God is with us, which was exactly Isaiah's message to Ahaz. Don't worry about those two kings to the north, for God is with us. All right? Isaiah also had other children that were signs to the people of his time. In Isaiah chapter 8, he had another son by the name of Maher-shalal-hash-baz. How would you like to name your kid that? And so that name, which was the name of Isaiah's son, Maher-shalal-hash-baz, means swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. It pictures somebody coming in battle to take over somebody else. And so in verse 3 of chapter 8, it says, Then I knew the prophetess, I had relations with the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Now I want you to compare these two verses that are circled in blue. First is chapter 8, verse 3, which mentions the prophetess, or Isaiah's wife, and she will conceive and gave birth to a son. And notice the similarity. The virgin, or you could translate this young woman, will conceive and give birth to a son. And back up there it says, and we'll call him Immanuel. And down here it says, name him Maher-shalal-hash-baz. So the first son of Isaiah was, God is with us, reminding Ahaz of that. The second son of, one of the other sons of Isaiah was Maher-shalal-hash-baz, which means swift is the booty, speedy is the prey, because the king of Assyria was going to be sent by God, and he was going to destroy those two nations to the north and eventually take the kingdom of Israel captive as well. I want you to also compare verse 15 and 16 up in chapter 7 with verse 4 in chapter 8. These are the ones circled in red. And let's do some marking up there to show you the similarity. Notice it says up here in verse 16, for before the boy, meaning Immanuel, notice down here the similar wording, for before the boy, and back up here in verse 16, before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, before the boy knows how to say my father or my mother, up here, the land whose two kings you're so afraid of will be laid waste. Down here, the wealth of Damascus, which was the capital of Syria, and the plunder of Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, will be carried off by the king of Assyria. So the same basic message is here in the original setting in both of these passages. Both Immanuel and Maher-shalal-hash-baz were signs to the people of Judah that God was with them if they would just trust him, and the spoils and the booty were coming soon when the king of Assyria came down and took care of those two kings to the north. Isaiah 8:18 goes on to say that Isaiah and his children were for signs for the people of God. And you see that in chapter 7, verse 14, and also in chapter 8, verse 18. So this is the literal, contextual, in the setting of the Old Testament, meaning of this prophecy. But there was also a spiritual, long-term meaning, particularly in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. Because in Matthew chapter 1, and Matthew tells us clearly that Jesus' mother Mary was a virgin who had never known a man, see? But that's not the main point here of the prophecy in Matthew. It says in Matthew 1, verse 22, at the birth of Jesus, all this took place in order to fulfill what the Lord spoke by the prophet. Now, fulfill means that something that had a literal, contextual meaning in the Old Testament now has a full or spiritual meaning in the pages of the New Testament. And the passage says, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Immanuel, which Matthew emphasizes, which means God is with us. So even though God wanted to communicate back in the Old Testament to King Ahaz that God was with them, in the fuller spiritual sense, God was with us in the incarnation of Jesus more than at any other time, because he literally became flesh in the womb of this virgin and became a human being. So the Jesus meaning is the fuller spiritual meaning of that prophecy, and the literal Jewish meaning is the sign of Isaiah's son Immanuel in that day. So what do we learn from all this? Prophecy sometimes has more than one meaning. It has sometimes a literal meaning in the pages of the Old Testament, and a full or spiritual meaning in the experience of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. I'm Dan Owen, and this is Passage Attack, and I hope you have a wonderful week in the service of God.